Sarah Martinez had always been told she was too small, too weak, and too fragile for military combat training. At barely 5 feet 4 inches and weighing only 125 pounds, she looked nothing like the typical soldiers who walked through the gates of Fort Bragg. Her delicate features and quiet demeanor made seasoned officers shake their heads in disbelief when they saw her name on the advanced combat training roster. Growing up in a small Texas town, Sarah had faced constant doubt about her abilities. Her high school counselors tried to steer her toward nursing or teaching, careers they deemed more suitable for someone of her stature. Even her own family questioned her decision to join the military, with her father repeatedly asking if she was sure she could handle the physical demands. But Sarah carried a fire inside her that no one could see from the outside. She had spent years training in mixed martial arts, starting when she was just 12 years old after being bullied at school. Her sensei, an elderly man who had served in Vietnam, taught her that size meant nothing if you had technique, strategy, and an unbreakable will. He would often tell her that the strongest warriors were those who had been underestimated their entire lives. When Sarah arrived at the military base for her advanced combat training, whispers followed her everywhere. Fellow recruits would glance at her and wonder how she had even made it through basic training. Some assumed she was there as part of some diversity program, while others thought she must have connections in high places. None of them knew about the countless hours she had spent perfecting her fighting techniques, studying combat strategies, or building her mental resilience. The training facility was intimidating, filled with equipment designed to push even the strongest soldiers to their limits. Sarah walked through the obstacle courses and combat training areas, taking mental notes of everything she saw. She noticed how the male recruits moved, where they placed their strength and what techniques they favored. She was already planning her approach, analyzing weaknesses and preparing for the challenges ahead. Commander Jake Thompson was a legend at the base. Standing 6 feet 3 inches and weighing 220 pounds of pure muscle, he was a decorated Navy SEAL with over 15 years of combat experience. His reputation preceded him everywhere he went, with stories of his incredible strength and fighting abilities spreading throughout the military community. He had never been defeated in hand-to-hand combat training, and his mere presence was enough to intimidate even the most confident soldiers. Thompson had trained hundreds of recruits over the years, and he prided himself on being able to assess someone's capabilities within minutes of meeting them. When he first saw Sarah's file, he assumed there had been some kind of administrative error. There was no way someone with her physical statistics could succeed in his advanced combat program. He had seen tough-looking men twice her size wash out within the first week of training. The other instructors shared Thompson's skepticism. During their briefing meetings, they would joke about having to go easy on the new female recruit, worried that she might get seriously injured during the intensive training sessions. Some suggested moving her to a different program, one more suited to her apparent limitations. But Thompson decided to let her try, convinced that she would voluntarily withdraw once she realized what she was up against. Sarah sensed the doubt surrounding her from the moment she stepped into the training facility. She could feel the stares, hear the whispered conversations, and see the patronizing smiles from the instructors. Instead of feeling discouraged, she used their skepticism as fuel for her determination. She had faced doubt her entire life, and she had learned to transform it into strength. On her first day of training, Sarah observed everything carefully. She watched how the other recruits interacted with the instructors, noted the hierarchy within the group, and studied the training methods being used. She realized that most of the male recruits relied heavily on their size and brute strength, often neglecting technique and strategy. This gave her valuable insight into how she could gain an advantage despite her smaller stature. The initial training sessions were grueling, designed to test not just physical strength, but mental resilience as well. Sarah struggled with some of the exercises that required pure upper body strength, but she excelled in areas that demanded agility, precision, and strategic thinking. She completed obstacle courses faster than many of her larger counterparts, using her size to her advantage in tight spaces and challenging terrain. Thompson watched Sarah during these early sessions with growing curiosity. While she clearly struggled with certain physical challenges, there was something different about her approach to training. She never complained, never asked for special consideration, and seemed to analyze every situation before taking action. He began to notice that she was studying not just the exercises but also the other recruits and even the instructors themselves. As the days progressed, Sarah's true abilities began to emerge. During sparring sessions with other recruits, she demonstrated remarkable technique and timing. While her opponents relied on overpowering her with strength, she used their momentum against them, employing throws and submission holds that left much larger soldiers lying on the mat. The other recruits began to take notice, and their initial amusement turned to grudging respect. The training facility had a culture of competition, where recruits would often challenge each other to informal sparring matches during their free time. Sarah found herself being challenged regularly, with soldiers eager to test themselves against the small woman who was gaining a reputation for her fighting skills. She accepted every challenge, viewing each match as an opportunity to learn and improve her techniques. Word of Sarah's abilities began to spread throughout the base. Soldiers from other units would come to watch her training sessions, curious to see the recruit who was defying all expectations. Some were impressed by her skills, while others remained skeptical, convinced that she was just getting lucky against inexperienced opponents. The buzz around her performance eventually reached Commander Thompson's ears from multiple sources. Thompson found himself in an unusual position. His initial assessment of Sarah had been completely wrong, and he was beginning to realize that she might be something special. However, his reputation was built on being an unbeatable fighter, and he could sense that people were beginning to wonder how he would fare against this unexpected challenger. The pressure was mounting for some kind of confrontation, though neither he nor Sarah had openly acknowledged it yet. The turning point came during the third week of training, when Sarah faced off against Marcus Rodriguez, a former college wrestler who outweighed her by nearly 100 pounds. Marcus was known for his aggressive fighting style and had dominated every opponent he had faced during training. The other recruits gathered around the sparring mat, expecting to see Sarah finally meet her match against someone with real fighting experience. Marcus entered the ring with confidence, cracking his knuckles and rolling his shoulders as he sized up his much smaller opponent. He had watched Sarah's previous matches and wasn't impressed by what he considered to be lucky victories against unprepared opponents. In his mind, real strength and wrestling experience would easily overcome whatever tricks she had been using to win her fights. Sarah approached the match with her usual calm demeanor, but her mind was racing with tactical calculations. She had studied Marcus during his previous fights and noticed that he had a tendency to rely heavily on his initial rush, trying to overwhelm opponents with his size and strength in the opening moments. She also observed that he became frustrated when his primary strategy didn't work, leading to sloppy technique and poor decision-making. The match began with Marcus charging forward, attempting to use his wrestling background to take Sarah to the ground where his weight advantage would be decisive. Sarah sidestepped his initial attack with fluid grace, using his momentum to throw him off balance. As he stumbled past her, she delivered a precise strike to a pressure point that temporarily numbed his left arm, demonstrating the effectiveness of her martial arts training. Marcus recovered quickly, but Sarah could see the surprise in his eyes. He had expected an easy victory, and her evasion of his best technique had shaken his confidence. He circled her more cautiously now, trying to use his reach advantage to keep her at a distance while looking for an opening to close in for another takedown attempt. Sarah remained patient, allowing Marcus to dictate the pace while she studied his movement patterns. She noticed that he favored his right side, probably due to an old injury, and that he telegraphed his attacks by shifting his weight in predictable ways. When he finally committed to another rushing attack, she was ready for him. Using a technique she had perfected through years of training, Sarah grabbed Marcus's extended arm and used his own forward momentum to flip him over her shoulder in a perfect throw. The impact with the mat was loud enough to be heard throughout the training facility, and Marcus lay there stunned, trying to catch his breath while Sarah stood calmly beside him, barely breathing hard from the exertion. The crowd of watching soldiers erupted in surprised cheers and applause. They had expected to see Sarah finally defeated by a more experienced opponent, but instead, they had witnessed a masterful display of technique triumphing over brute strength. Even the instructors who had been skeptical of her abilities were forced to acknowledge that her victory was no fluke. Commander Thompson watched the match from the back of the crowd, his expression unreadable. He had to admit that Sarah's technique was impressive, but he found himself analyzing her fighting style, looking for weaknesses that a more experienced fighter could exploit. Part of him was impressed by her skill, while another part felt challenged by the growing attention she was receiving. Following her victory over Marcus, Sarah's reputation at the base underwent a dramatic transformation. Recruits who had once dismissed her as a diversity case now spoke of her with genuine respect. Stories of her fighting abilities spread throughout the facility, with each retelling adding new details about her incredible techniques and mental toughness. The requests for sparring matches increased dramatically, with soldiers from other units seeking permission to test themselves against the recruit who was developing a legendary status. Sarah accepted every reasonable challenge, viewing each fight as an opportunity to further hone her skills and learn from different fighting styles and techniques. Her training performance in other areas also began to attract attention. Sarah excelled in tactical planning exercises, often developing creative solutions that instructors had not considered. Her small size, which had initially been seen as a disadvantage, proved to be an asset in reconnaissance training and stealth exercises, where her ability to move quietly and fit into tight spaces gave her significant advantages over larger soldiers. Thompson found himself paying closer attention to Sarah's progress, ostensibly as part of his duties as head instructor, but also out of personal curiosity. He began attending her training sessions more frequently, offering corrections and suggestions that he typically reserved for only the most promising recruits. Despite his growing respect for her abilities, he maintained his authoritative demeanor and never gave any indication that he saw her as anything more than another trainee. Sarah was aware of Thompson's increased attention, but chose to focus on her training rather than speculate about his motivations. She approached each session with the same intensity and focus that had gotten her this far, determined to prove that her early successes were not temporary flukes, but rather the result of genuine skill and preparation. The other instructors began to take notice of Thompson's interest in Sarah's development. Some attributed it to professional duty, while others wondered if the undefeatable commander was feeling threatened by the rising star in his program. The tension was subtle, but noticeable to those who knew Thompson well and understood his competitive nature. During a particularly challenging obstacle course exercise, Sarah demonstrated her problem-solving abilities when she encountered a section that seemed impossible for someone of her size to complete. Instead of admitting defeat, she studied the challenge for several minutes before developing an innovative approach that allowed her to complete the course faster than any previous recruit had managed. Thompson watched this display with mixed emotions. He was genuinely impressed by her creativity and determination, but he also felt a growing pressure from the other personnel at the base who were beginning to question whether anyone could truly challenge this remarkable recruit. The whispers were becoming louder, and he knew that eventually someone would suggest a direct confrontation between him and Sarah. The inevitable challenge came from an unexpected source. During a routine training briefing, one of the visiting officers made a casual comment about wanting to see how Sarah would fare against their legendary commander. The comment was meant as a joke, but it sparked a conversation among the assembled personnel about the theoretical matchup between the two fighters. Thompson deflected the suggestion with humor, but Sarah could see something change in his demeanor. She realized that the growing attention surrounding her abilities was creating a situation that neither of them had anticipated. The base's culture of competition and the natural curiosity about how their skills would compare was building pressure for a confrontation that could have significant consequences for both of their careers. As the weeks progressed, the speculation about a potential match between Thompson and Sarah continued to grow. Soldiers would place informal bets on the outcome, debate the advantages each fighter would have, and discuss what techniques might be effective. The buzz around this hypothetical fight was becoming impossible to ignore, and both Thompson and Sarah knew that eventually they would have to address the situation directly. The tension reached a breaking point during the monthly base-wide training demonstration, an event where different units showcased their best soldiers and training techniques for visiting military officials and dignitaries. Thompson was scheduled to demonstrate advanced combat techniques, while Sarah had been selected to represent her training class in tactical problem-solving exercises. The demonstration was held in the main training facility, with bleachers packed with hundreds of soldiers, officers, and civilian guests. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, as word had spread throughout the base about the remarkable recruit who had been dominating her training sessions. Many attendees were there specifically to see Sarah perform, curious about the small woman who had generated so much buzz. Thompson's demonstration went flawlessly, as expected. He performed a series of complex combat maneuvers against multiple opponents, showcasing the skills that had made him legendary. The crowd watched in impressed silence as he effortlessly defeated 3 large soldiers in consecutive sparring matches, using a combination of strength, technique, and tactical awareness that left no doubt about his capabilities. Sarah's portion of the demonstration focused on tactical problem-solving and obstacle navigation. She was presented with a series of increasingly complex scenarios that required creative thinking and physical adaptability. The audience watched in amazement as she solved each challenge with innovative approaches that no one had previously considered, often completing tasks in half the time that had been allocated. During her final challenge, Sarah was required to navigate a complex obstacle course while solving tactical puzzles at various stations. The course had been designed to be extremely difficult, with multiple sections that seemed to require different specialized skills. Sarah approached each obstacle methodically, using her size and agility to her advantage, while demonstrating remarkable problem-solving abilities. At one particularly challenging section, Sarah encountered a wall that was clearly designed for much taller individuals. Instead of struggling to reach the designated handholds, she studied the structure for a moment before identifying an alternative route that utilized smaller protrusions and required precise timing and coordination. Her solution was so elegant that several engineers in the audience took notes on her approach. The crowd's reaction to Sarah's performance was overwhelmingly positive, with enthusiastic applause and cheers echoing throughout the facility. Even visiting officers who had never heard of her before were impressed by her innovative thinking and flawless execution. The demonstration had elevated her reputation beyond the confines of her training unit to the entire base community. After the formal demonstrations concluded, the event transitioned into a more informal showcase where personnel could interact with the demonstrators and ask questions about techniques and training methods. Sarah found herself surrounded by curious soldiers and officers, all eager to learn more about her background and training philosophy. Thompson observed these interactions from across the room, noting how Sarah handled the attention with grace and humility. She answered every question thoughtfully, gave credit to her instructors and training partners, and showed genuine interest in learning from the experiences of others. Her professionalism impressed him, even as he felt the growing pressure of unspoken comparisons between their respective performances. The inevitable moment came when General Patricia Williams, the base commander, approached both Thompson and Sarah during the informal reception. General Williams was known for her direct communication style and her ability to cut through military protocol when necessary. She had been watching the growing speculation about these two exceptional fighters with interest and amusement. "Commander Thompson," General Williams said with a slight smile, "I've been hearing quite a lot of talk lately about how your skills might compare to those of our rising star here." She gestured toward Sarah, who maintained her composure despite suddenly finding herself at the center of a very public conversation. Thompson felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him as conversations throughout the room gradually quieted. He knew that his response to this moment would be remembered and discussed for months to come. The respectful thing would be to deflect with humor, but he could sense that the crowd was expecting something more substantial. "Recruit Martinez has certainly demonstrated exceptional abilities," Thompson replied diplomatically. "Her innovative approaches and tactical thinking are impressive by any standard." He was trying to give Sarah credit while avoiding any direct comparison of their fighting abilities. Sarah recognized the delicate position that both she and Thompson were in. She had never sought this kind of attention or comparison, but she also understood that backing down now might be seen as an admission that she didn't belong at this level of training. Her response needed to be respectful but confident. "Commander Thompson's reputation speaks for itself," Sarah said carefully. "I've learned a great deal just from observing his training methods and techniques. Any soldier would benefit from the opportunity to train with someone of his experience and skill level." General Williams smiled at their diplomatic responses, but she wasn't finished with the conversation. "You're both being very professional, but I think everyone here is curious about the same thing. Would you be interested in a friendly sparring demonstration? Nothing formal, Just a chance for our personnel to see different fighting styles in action. The room fell completely silent as everyone waited for their responses. Thompson felt the full weight of his reputation pressing down on him. Declining would seem cowardly, but accepting carried significant risks. If he won easily, it might diminish Sarah's accomplishments and discourage other recruits. If the match were closer than expected, it could damage his own legendary status. Sarah was equally aware of the stakes involved. This was far beyond anything she had anticipated when she first arrived at the base. A sparring match with Commander Thompson would be unlike any challenge she had previously faced, both in terms of skill level and public scrutiny. The outcome would affect not just her own career, but potentially the opportunities available to future female recruits. "I would be honored to participate in such a demonstration," Sarah said after a long pause. "If Commander Thompson is willing, I believe it could be educational for everyone involved." Her voice remained steady, but Thompson could see the determination in her eyes. Thompson realized that he was out of diplomatic options. The crowd was clearly expecting him to accept the challenge, and refusing now would raise questions about his confidence in his own abilities. "Of course," he said with a slight nod. "When would be convenient for such a demonstration?" General Williams had anticipated this outcome and was prepared with logistics. "How about next Friday afternoon? That would give both of you time to prepare and allow us to set up proper viewing arrangements for interested personnel." The crowd murmured with excitement at the prospect of witnessing this unprecedented matchup. The reception continued. Both Thompson and Sarah found themselves surrounded by well-wishers and advice givers. Fellow soldiers offered training tips, shared stories of their own fighting experiences, and speculated about strategies that might be effective. The excitement was building throughout the base as word spread about the upcoming demonstration. Thompson spent the remainder of the evening analyzing what he knew about Sarah's fighting style. He had observed her matches closely and recognized that her success came from superior technique and tactical thinking, rather than physical strength. He would need to be careful not to underestimate her abilities, while also being mindful of the public nature of their upcoming encounter. Sarah returned to her quarters that night with mixed emotions. She was excited about the opportunity to test her skills against such an accomplished fighter, but she was also aware of the enormous pressure that came with such public scrutiny. This match would be unlike anything she had experienced before, and she knew that her preparation would need to be absolutely perfect. The week leading up to the demonstration was unlike anything the base had experienced in recent memory. News of the upcoming match spread far beyond Fort Bragg, with soldiers from other installations requesting permission to attend, and civilian military contractors adjusting their schedules to witness the historic confrontation. The base communications office was flooded with requests from military journalists wanting to cover the event. Thompson found himself in an unusual position as he prepared for the match. Throughout his career, he had always trained with the confidence that came from superior size, strength, and experience. Now he was facing an opponent who had already proven that conventional advantages meant little against her unique combination of technique and tactical intelligence. He spent hours reviewing footage of Sarah's previous matches, studying her movement patterns and identifying potential weaknesses. His training sessions became more intense and focused than they had been in years. Thompson worked on techniques specifically designed to counter smaller, more agile opponents, practicing moves that would neutralize Sarah's speed advantage without relying solely on brute force. He consulted with other experienced fighters who had faced similar challenges, seeking advice on strategy and mental preparation. The other instructors watched Thompson's preparations with fascination. They had never seen him work this hard to prepare for any opponent, and his intense focus suggested that he was taking Sarah's abilities very seriously. Some began to wonder if their legendary commander was feeling more pressure than he was letting on, while others saw his preparation as a sign of respect for Sarah's skills. Sarah approached her preparation with the same methodical intensity that had defined her entire military career. She studied every piece of available footage of Thompson's fights, analyzing his techniques, timing, and tactical preferences. She noticed that he tended to rely heavily on his reach, advantage, and preferred to end fights quickly with powerful combinations rather than engaging in prolonged exchanges. Her training regimen focused on mobility and defensive positioning, working on techniques that would allow her to stay close enough to be effective, while avoiding Thompson's most dangerous attacks. She practiced complex footwork patterns that would keep her moving unpredictably, making it difficult for him to use his size advantage effectively. Her sparring partners during this week were all larger men, who had been instructed to mimic Thompson's fighting style as closely as possible. Sarah also spent considerable time working on her mental preparation. She knew that the psychological pressure of fighting in front of hundreds of spectators would be unlike anything she had previously experienced. She practiced visualization techniques, imagining every possible scenario and her responses to them. Her martial arts background had taught her that mental preparation was often more important than physical. Training when facing a superior opponent. The betting activity around the base became so intense that General Williams had to issue a formal order prohibiting any gambling on the outcome of the demonstration. Soldiers were still privately discussing odds and predictions, but the official prohibition prevented the situation from becoming a serious disciplinary issue. The overwhelming majority of bets had favored Thompson, though a small but vocal minority believed that Sarah's track record of defeating larger opponents would continue. Media attention continued to build throughout the week, with several military publications sending reporters to cover the event. The story had captured attention because it represented something larger than just a sparring match between two soldiers. It had become a symbol of changing attitudes about gender roles in the military and the importance of technique over raw physical strength. Thompson gave several interviews during the week, always emphasizing his respect for Sarah's abilities while maintaining confidence in his own skills. He was careful to avoid any comments that might be seen as dismissive or condescending, knowing that his words would be scrutinized by many people both inside and outside the military community. Sarah declined most interview requests, preferring to focus on her preparation rather than media attention. When she did speak with reporters, she emphasized her gratitude for the training opportunities she had received and her respect for Commander Thompson's accomplishments. She avoided making any predictions about the outcome, stating simply that she intended to do her best and learn from the experience. The physical preparation facility became a focal point of attention during the week, with soldiers finding excuses to walk past during Thompson and Sarah's training sessions. Both fighters noticed the increased scrutiny, but tried to maintain their normal routines despite the constant observation. The pressure was building for both of them, though they expressed it differently. Thompson's training partners reported that he was pushing himself harder than usual, working on combinations and techniques that he hadn't used in years. He seemed determined to be prepared for any style of fighting that Sarah might employ, practicing counters to techniques that smaller fighters often used against larger opponents. His intensity was impressive but also suggested a level of concern that surprised those who knew him well. Sarah's preparation included extensive work on endurance and conditioning, recognizing that a longer fight would favor her technical skills over Thompson's power advantages. She worked with her coaches on strategies for extending the match if necessary, focusing on defensive techniques that would allow her to survive Thompson's initial attacks and create opportunities for counterstrikes. The base gymnasium was reconfigured during the week to accommodate the expected crowd for Friday's demonstration. Additional seating was installed, and a proper fighting ring was constructed with optimal sight lines for spectators. The preparations had transformed a routine training demonstration into something resembling a professional sporting event. Both fighters maintained their regular schedules despite the extraordinary circumstances, attending their normal duties and training obligations. Thompson continued his instructional responsibilities, though soldiers noticed that he seemed more focused and serious than usual. Sarah attended her regular classes and training sessions, though her classmates reported that she appeared calm and confident despite the mounting pressure. The psychological warfare began subtly during the middle of the week. Thompson made a point of demonstrating particularly impressive techniques during his regular training sessions, knowing that word would reach Sarah about his capabilities. He wasn't trying to intimidate her directly, but he wanted to ensure that she understood the level of skill she would be facing. Sarah responded by focusing on her own training intensity, pushing herself through increasingly difficult exercises and sparring sessions. Her performance during the week was consistently exceptional, and stories of her preparation began to circulate alongside reports of Thompson's training. The base community was watching both fighters prepare, and the anticipation continued to build. By Thursday evening, both Thompson and Sarah had completed their final intensive training sessions. The time for preparation was ending, and both fighters began to shift their focus toward mental readiness and tactical planning. They had done everything possible to prepare physically, and now the match would come down to skill, strategy, and mental toughness. The base was buzzing with excitement as Friday approached. Soldiers were making final arrangements to attend the demonstration. Civilian contractors were adjusting their schedules, and even some family members had received permission to observe the historic match. The stage was set for a confrontation that would be remembered for years to come, regardless of the outcome. Friday afternoon arrived with an electric atmosphere that permeated every corner of Fort Bragg. The base gymnasium had been transformed into something resembling a professional fighting venue, with bleachers packed with hundreds of soldiers, officers, civilian contractors, and invited guests. Military personnel from other installations had driven hours to witness the historic confrontation, and the crowd represented one of the largest gatherings ever assembled for a training demonstration. Thompson arrived at the facility 2 hours before the scheduled match, using the time for final mental preparation and light physical warm-up exercises. He had slept well the previous night, something that surprised him given the magnitude of the event, and he felt as ready as he had ever been for any challenge in his military career. His usual pre-fight routine helped him maintain the calm confidence that had served him throughout his career. Sarah spent her final preparation time in meditation and visualization exercises, techniques she had learned during her martial arts training that helped her maintain focus under pressure. She reviewed her tactical plans one final time, going through the various scenarios she might encounter and her planned responses to each situation. Her breathing was controlled and steady, a sign that her mental preparation had been effective. The crowd began filing into the gymnasium an hour before the demonstration was scheduled to begin, and the noise level gradually increased as more spectators arrived. Conversations throughout the bleachers focused on predictions, analysis of each fighter's strengths and weaknesses, and speculation about what techniques might prove decisive in the upcoming match. General Williams took her position at the head table, surrounded by other senior officers and visiting dignitaries. She had mixed feelings about the attention this event was receiving, recognizing both the positive aspects of showcasing exceptional military talent and the potential risks associated with such a high-profile confrontation between a male commander and a female recruit. The formal introductions began precisely at 1400 hours, with General Williams addressing the crowd about the purpose of the demonstration and the exceptional abilities of both participants. She emphasized that this was a training exercise designed to showcase different fighting techniques and approaches, though everyone present understood that it had evolved into something much more significant. Thompson entered the ring first, wearing standard military combat gear and moving with the confident stride that had become his trademark. The crowd's reaction was respectful and appreciative, recognizing his years of service and impressive record of accomplishments. He acknowledged the spectators with a slight nod before beginning his final warm-up routine. Sarah's entrance generated a noticeably different energy from the crowd. There was an undercurrent of excitement and anticipation that reflected the remarkable journey she had taken from unknown recruit to this moment of ultimate testing. She moved with quiet confidence, showing no signs of nervousness despite the unprecedented pressure of the situation. The official rules were explained to both fighters and the audience. This would be a controlled sparring match with specific safety protocols overseen by experienced referees and medical personnel. Points would be awarded for successful techniques, and the match would continue until one fighter achieved a decisive advantage or the referee determined that continuing would be unsafe. Both fighters completed their final preparations and took their positions in the center of the ring. The crowd fell silent as they faced each other, the size difference between them immediately apparent but somehow less significant than it might have seemed weeks earlier. Thompson extended his hand in a gesture of respect, which Sarah accepted, with a firm handshake that surprised him with its strength. The referee's signal began the most anticipated fight in Fort Bragg's recent history. Thompson opened with a cautious approach, using his reach advantage to test Sarah's defensive reactions while avoiding any early commitments that might create openings for her counterattacks. His initial movements were smooth and controlled, showing the technique that had made him legendary. Sarah responded with patient footwork, staying mobile and studying Thompson's timing while avoiding his initial probing attacks. She had expected him to start conservatively, and her preparation had included extensive work on defensive positioning for exactly this type of opening exchange. Her movements were fluid and economical, conserving energy while gathering information about his fighting style. The first significant exchange came when Thompson committed to a combination attack, using his size advantage to press forward with a series of strikes designed to overwhelm Sarah's defensive positioning. The crowd leaned forward as he appeared to gain the initiative, his powerful attacks forcing Sarah to give ground while defending against his superior reach and strength. Sarah's response demonstrated why she had become so successful against larger opponents. Instead of trying to match Thompson's power directly, she used his forward momentum against him, sidestepping his final attack and countering with a precise strike to his ribs that temporarily disrupted his breathing rhythm. The crowd gasped at the effectiveness of her counterattack and the visible impact it had on Thompson. Thompson recovered quickly, but Sarah could see that her counter had surprised him more than he was letting on. She had managed to penetrate his defenses with a technique that most of his previous opponents had been unable to execute effectively. The early exchange had established that this would not be the easy victory that some spectators had predicted. The pace of the fight gradually increased as both fighters began to understand each other's capabilities and limitations. Thompson's attacks became more aggressive as he realized that Sarah's defensive skills were even better than he had anticipated from watching her previous matches. Her ability to avoid his most dangerous techniques while creating counterattack opportunities was forcing him to work harder than he had expected. Sarah began to implement the tactical plan she had developed during her preparation week. She focused on staying close enough to negate Thompson's reach advantage, while using her superior mobility to avoid prolonged exchanges where his strength would be decisive. Her footwork kept her moving unpredictably, making it difficult for him to set up the combinations that had been effective against other opponents. The crowd's energy continued to build as the match progressed beyond the quick conclusion that many had anticipated. Both fighters were demonstrating exceptional skill levels, with Thompson's power and experience matched against Sarah's technique and tactical intelligence. The back-and-forth nature of the contest was creating exactly the type of excitement that had made this event so anticipated. Thompson began to show signs of frustration as his usual tactics proved less effective than normal. Sarah's defensive skills were unlike anything he had encountered in recent years, and her counterattacks were consistently finding small openings in his technique. He realized that he would need to take greater risks to achieve the decisive advantage that everyone expected from him. Sarah sensed Thompson's growing aggression and recognized that the moment she had prepared for was approaching. Her conditioning work was paying off as the match extended beyond what most observers had predicted, and she could see that Thompson was working harder than he was accustomed to in order to find solutions to her defensive strategies. The crucial moment came when Thompson committed to his most aggressive attack sequence of the match, using a combination of strikes that had never failed to overwhelm his previous opponents. The crowd held its breath as he pressed forward with overwhelming force, apparently putting Sarah in an impossible defensive position that would force her to either absorb significant damage or make a desperate mistake. As Thompson launched his most powerful attack sequence, Sarah's years of training and preparation crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. Time seemed to slow as she recognized the exact pattern she had practiced against countless times during her preparation week. This was the moment she had been waiting for, and every instinct honed through years of martial arts training told her exactly what she needed to do. Instead of retreating from Thompson's overwhelming assault, Sarah did something completely unexpected. She stepped directly into his attack, using a technique that required perfect timing and absolute confidence in her defensive abilities. The crowd gasped as she appeared to be walking directly into certain defeat. But Sarah was executing a strategy that few fighters would have had the courage to attempt. Thompson's surprise at her aggressive response caused him to hesitate for just a fraction of a second, but that brief pause was exactly what Sarah needed. She had studied this exact moment in countless training sessions, practicing the precise timing required to turn an opponent's maximum aggression against them. Using Thompson's forward momentum and the slight hesitation caused by her unexpected response, Sarah executed a throw that combined elements from multiple martial arts disciplines. She grabbed his extended arm while simultaneously sweeping his leg, using his own weight and forward motion to send him tumbling toward the mat with tremendous force. The technique was flawless in its execution and devastating in its effectiveness. The sound of Thompson hitting the mat echoed throughout the gymnasium like a thunderclap. The crowd fell completely silent for a moment, stunned by what they had just witnessed. The legendary Navy SEAL commander, who had never been defeated in combat training, was lying on his back while Sarah stood over him, barely breathing hard despite the intensity of the exchange. But the most shocking part was yet to come. As Thompson attempted to recover and regain his footing, Sarah could hear something that made her heart stop. There was a distinct sound coming from Thompson's chest area, a labored breathing pattern that she recognized from her medical training. She immediately realized that something had gone wrong during the throw, and her concern shifted instantly from victory to her opponent's well-being. Thompson tried to push himself up from the mat, but a sharp pain in his ribcage forced him back down. The impact from the throw, combined with the awkward angle at which he had landed, had resulted in at least 2 fractured ribs. The pain was unlike anything he had experienced in years of combat training, and he found himself struggling to catch his breath properly. Sarah immediately dropped to her knees beside Thompson, her training as a field medic taking precedence over everything else happening around them. She could see the pain in his eyes and recognized the signs of a serious rib injury. Without hesitation, she began calling for medical personnel while performing a quick assessment of his condition. The crowd's initial shock gave way to concerned murmurs as they realized that this was no longer a sporting demonstration but a medical emergency. The base medical team rushed onto the mat, with Sarah providing them with a clear and professional assessment of Thompson's condition based on her observations and medical training. Thompson, despite his pain, was struck by Sarah's immediate transition from opponent to caregiver. Even in his injured state, he could appreciate the professionalism and genuine concern she showed for his well-being. Her focus was entirely on ensuring he received proper medical attention, with no thought for her own moment of triumph or the crowd's reaction to her victory. The medical team carefully stabilized Thompson and prepared him for transport to the base hospital for X-rays and further evaluation. As they lifted him onto a stretcher, he managed to catch Sarah's eye and give her a slight nod of acknowledgement. Despite the pain and the shock of his defeat, he recognized that he had just been beaten by someone truly exceptional. General Williams quickly took control of the situation, addressing the crowd and explaining that the demonstration had concluded due to the medical emergency. She emphasized that both fighters had performed admirably, and that the safety of military personnel was always the top priority. The crowd began to disperse, though many lingered to discuss what they had just witnessed. Sarah found herself in a strange position as the crowd began to realize the full significance of what had occurred. She had just defeated the legendary Commander Thompson in front of hundreds of witnesses, but her victory felt hollow, given the injury that had resulted. Her first concern remained Thompson's recovery, and she requested permission to accompany him to the medical facility. The news of Thompson's defeat spread throughout the base within minutes, carried by the hundreds of witnesses who had seen the impossible become reality. Phone calls and text messages went out to friends and colleagues at other installations, and by evening, military personnel across the country were discussing the remarkable recruit who had broken the ribs of a Navy SEAL commander. At the base hospital, X-rays confirmed that Thompson had suffered 2 fractured ribs and significant bruising to his chest area. The doctors assured everyone that his injuries, while painful, were not life-threatening and would heal completely with proper rest and treatment. Thompson would be out of active training for several weeks, but he would make a full recovery. Sarah waited in the hospital waiting room for news about Thompson's condition, declining interviews and avoiding the celebration that some of her fellow recruits were attempting to organize. She felt a complex mixture of emotions about what had happened. She was proud of her performance and grateful for the validation it provided, but she was also concerned about Thompson's well-being and the implications of what had occurred. When Thompson was finally settled in his hospital room, he asked to speak with Sarah privately. Despite his pain medication and obvious discomfort, he wanted to address what had happened between them before the situation became even more complicated by outside attention and speculation. That was an incredible technique, Thompson said as Sarah entered his room. I've never seen anything quite like it, and I certainly wasn't prepared for that level of skill. You earned that victory completely, and I want you to know that you have my complete respect as a fighter and as a soldier. Sarah was moved by his graciousness in defeat, especially given the pain he was experiencing. I'm sorry about your injuries, Commander. That wasn't the outcome I was hoping for, regardless of the match result. I hope you'll make a full recovery quickly. Thompson smiled despite his discomfort. Injuries are part of the business, Martinez. What matters is that you demonstrated something important today. You proved that skill and determination can overcome any perceived disadvantages, and you did it in a way that nobody will ever forget. That's a lesson that will benefit every soldier who witnessed it. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door, as news crews and military officials began arriving to document what was already being called one of the most significant training demonstrations in recent military history. The story of the small female recruit who had defeated the legendary SEAL commander was spreading far beyond Fort Bragg, and both Sarah and Thompson were about to become much more famous than either had anticipated. The weeks following the historic match brought changes to Fort Bragg that no one could have anticipated. Sarah's victory over Commander Thompson had captured national attention, with military publications, news outlets, and social media platforms all covering the story of the small recruit who had defeated one of the military's most legendary fighters. The narrative resonated far beyond military circles, inspiring discussions about determination, skill versus size, and breaking barriers in traditionally male-dominated fields. Sarah found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never sought or expected. Interview requests poured in from across the country, with everyone wanting to hear her story and understand how she had achieved what many considered impossible. She handled the attention with the same grace and professionalism she had shown throughout her training, always emphasizing the quality of instruction she had received and the support of her fellow soldiers. The military leadership recognized the positive impact Sarah's story was having on recruitment and public perception of military opportunities for women. Her achievement had demonstrated that the military's evolving standards and training methods were producing exceptional results, and her professionalism in handling the subsequent attention reflected well on the entire organization. Thompson's recovery progressed steadily, though he found the forced inactivity frustrating. After years of constant physical training and activity, he used his recovery time to reflect on the match and its implications, both for his own career and for the broader military training programs he had helped develop. His perspective on training, methods, and assessment criteria began to evolve as he considered what Sarah's success revealed about the limitations of traditional approaches. The relationship between Thompson and Sarah during his recovery period surprised many observers. Rather than harboring resentment about his defeat, Thompson became one of Sarah's strongest advocates and supporters. He recognized that her victory had been earned through superior preparation, technique, and mental toughness, and he respected her achievement without reservation. Their professional relationship evolved into a mentorship that benefited both of them. Thompson's experience and tactical knowledge complemented Sarah's innovative approaches and technical skills, creating opportunities for both to continue learning and developing. Their collaboration became a model for how military personnel could learn from each other, regardless of rank, experience, or background. The training programs at Fort Bragg underwent significant revisions in the months following the demonstration. Sarah's success had highlighted the importance of technique, strategy, and adaptability in combat situations, leading to curriculum changes that emphasize these elements alongside traditional strength and endurance training. The modifications made the programs more inclusive and effective for soldiers with diverse physical characteristics. Sarah was offered numerous opportunities for advancement and specialized training following her victory. Military leadership recognized her potential not just as a fighter, but as an instructor and innovator who could help develop more effective training methods. She accepted assignments that allowed her to share her knowledge while continuing to develop her own skills and expertise. The story of her victory became a case study in military academies and training facilities around the world. Her techniques were analyzed and incorporated into curriculum, while her approach to preparation and mental conditioning became standard topics in advanced training programs. The match had demonstrated principles that applied far beyond individual combat situations. Thompson returned to active duty with a renewed perspective on training and leadership. His experience of being defeated by someone he had initially underestimated had taught him valuable lessons about assessment, preparation, and the dangers of assumptions. He incorporated these insights into his instruction methods, making him an even more effective teacher and mentor. The base culture at Fort Bragg underwent a subtle but significant transformation in the aftermath of the demonstration. The clear evidence that skill and determination could overcome traditional physical advantages led to increased respect for diverse approaches to training and problem-solving. Female recruits and soldiers with non-traditional backgrounds found greater acceptance and opportunities for advancement. Sarah's success inspired a new generation of military personnel who had previously felt limited by their physical characteristics or background. Recruitment numbers among women and smaller-statured individuals increased significantly, with many citing Sarah's example as proof that military careers were attainable for people like themselves. The military gained access to a broader pool of talent and diverse perspectives. The friendship between Sarah and Thompson became legendary within military circles, demonstrating how professional respect could transcend the circumstances of their initial confrontation. They collaborated on training programs, shared speaking engagements, and continued to learn from each other's expertise and experience. Their partnership became an example of how apparent adversaries could become valuable allies. Years later, both Sarah and Thompson would look back on that Friday afternoon demonstration as a turning point in their careers and in their understanding of what military excellence could look like. The match had started as a test of individual capabilities, but had evolved into something much more significant. A demonstration of how challenging assumptions and embracing diverse approaches could benefit everyone involved. Sarah's career continued to flourish as she took on increasingly challenging assignments and leadership roles. Her reputation for innovative problem-solving and exceptional tactical skills opened doors that had previously been unavailable to someone with her background. She never forgot the lessons learned during her early training or the support she had received from unexpected sources. Thompson's career also reached new heights as he incorporated the insights gained from his experience with Sarah into his leadership and training philosophy. His willingness to acknowledge and learn from his defeat had enhanced rather than diminished his reputation, demonstrating the kind of intellectual honesty and adaptability that the military valued in its leaders. The gymnasium at Fort Bragg was eventually renamed in honor of both fighters, recognizing their contributions to military training and their demonstration of professional excellence under extraordinary circumstances. The facility became a symbol of how individual achievements could inspire broader institutional change and improvement. The legacy of that afternoon demonstration continued to influence military training and culture long after both Sarah and Thompson had moved on to other assignments and challenges. Their story became part of military folklore, inspiring future generations of soldiers to pursue excellence regardless of the obstacles they might face. The broken ribs had healed completely, but the lessons learned and the barriers broken remained as permanent reminders of what was possible when skill, determination, and courage came together in pursuit of excellence.